Welcome to the Holocaust podcast. This is class number 6 in the discourse Mimana Afar Yakov of 5672. This is the 8th discourse in the great book, B'Shoshe Ekdimu. And today we begin chapter 30, the first class in chapter 30. Let's just do the kitzer, the summary of last class, the Heyois. The Sharshay, remember that the last chapter was all about beginning to describe the emanation of the light from its very birth, so to speak, inside the womb of the Ein Sof. I'm calling it that way, but it means from a complete state of complete oneness with the pure or Ein Sof. And then later emerging out, where those lights are beginning to become detectable already outside of the womb, so to speak. As we learned yesterday, a separation of a radiance of the Or Ein Sof. So the lights already are beginning to become slightly nuanced. When they come out that way, they're still pashut, as we learned yesterday, because of their source. And finally, when they finally settle down in the vessels. And in the beginning of the chapter, as he says over here, because the lights, really, as he began the chapter, he said that it's precisely because from the very get-go, from the very origins of origins, in the Or Ein Sof itself, we can differentiate the Or Makif from the Or Pnimi, the encompassing lights, the pure Or Ein Sof, and the Or Ein Sof that is meant to be in a vessel, which means that in truth of truths, when we get to the very down to the very essence of it, the oiros, the lights are not utterly pshutim. They're not completely pashut. We even learned yesterday that from the microscope of the pre-tzimtzum microscope, it wouldn't even pass the test of echad, of oneness, let alone the test of yachid. So it's really, there is already a hidden element already of 10 lights, and it's precisely, but that's very important over here because that's the there in the lights itself at its very beginning. It's for that reason he explained in the beginning of the chapter, the vessels are ultimately able to get a handle on that light. If the light would be completely pashut at the very beginning, then they would never be able to have a marriage between the vessels and the lights. The vessels need to be able to grasp onto something. And if the lights would be somethinglessness without any traction, then they wouldn't have any traction. There would be nothing to grab onto. They need to have a little bit, like you create traction on a road or you create traction on a tire. So the road can grip the tire a little bit, something like that, or the tire can grip the road, whatever. So this is the idea. And since the Sharshay of the Oirais, the root of the lights, are 10 Sfiros, even in their very beginning in the Or Ein Sof, but again, for all practical purposes, these 10 Sfiros don't exist as 10. They're totally one with the Or Ein Sof. But they really are there. And they're there so much that That if you're going to block the Or Ein Sof, you're going to be able to start seeing them. Which is blocking the Or Ein Sof. That allows these lights to come out in a more divisible manner, and in a very great reduced state. Therefore, they're able, eventually they're able to be enclosed in vessels, which, again, not in every vessel, but at least these divine vessels are lofty and abstract enough that the abstraction of the vessels, together with the non-abstraction of the lights, what I'm using over here is the two opposites. Vessels usually are not abstract. Lights are usually abstract. But how do you merge the two together? Because the vessels over here are divine vessels, and therefore they too are very not really limited. They are limited, but not really limited. And the lights, as no matter how high these lights are, and therefore should be utterly abstract, are not completely abstract, to have something to it. It's because of that. That's why they're able to get married together. And when they become islabush, they become like the vessels. And then now the two of them can attach themselves. And in the lights now there are three levels. Now he begins to process the three levels of the lights. Now this very, very process of the lights descending from a very, very, very undefined state into a more graspable state. The first level, when the lights are still the roots of the lights, not even the lights, they're the source of the light that are still kolol and absorbed in the Orin Soif. Before the tzimtzum. On this we say antuchad. All we can see is oneness. Even though they're 10, they are literally in an essential state of oneness because they're one with the Orin Sof. And he says in a parenthesis, very important, when we are comparing them to the later lights, which already are not chad, they're already in a state of 10. So compared to that, this is called chad mamish, completely one. Of course, within the litmus test, within the pre-tzimtzum standards, we wouldn't say they're chad. But compared to anything after the tzimtzum, they are called complete chad, like we discussed in the earlier classes. Complete one with the Orin Sof. Habez, the second level, is Galas Oris Meshorsha, when the lights do move out and they reveal themselves from their source. They're moving outward and they're coming out into a state of revealing the concealed. Hagam shehem b'pchinas miut, even though now they are in a reduced state, but since there's still something there from the original, since it's a continuation of the Orein Sof, and we said it's not b'derech siluk, it's not, the tzimtzum is not wiping away every trace of it. Therefore, hareihem b'pchinas pshitus, you still feel the abstraction, you still feel the simplicity of the Orein Sof, and therefore, as we discussed yesterday, they kind of are already differentiatable, but they're very elusive. When you finally think you can pin the chachma to be chachma, it disappears and it's not chachma. It's yeah and it's no, because the lights it's very fluid at this point. On this we say Esa Sfiros Belima. These are the 10 spheros without substance. Or we said Antu Chakim, or as he says over here, Chakim and wise, but not with a knowable type of chachma. It's chachma already, but not chachma. Once it will go into the vessels, even in Atzilos, then we will call it chachma yediyah. It will be called knowable chachma. So this is a review, a kitzer, on what we learned in the last chapter, and now going full throttle, chapter 30. Now, Beis Madreges Anal, and on these two levels, Nemar. So far, again, we said that he's going to discuss all three levels. But so far, he didn't, in chapter 29, he only brought to our attention the first two levels of the light. The light in its source and the light emerging from its source. But we haven't reached the third level where they contact the vessels. That's going to be in this chapter, but a little further down, not in today's class. He's still going to continue busying himself, so to speak, in the difference between the first level of the lights when they are still included in before the tzimtzum and the Orein Sof, and the lights after they make their way out post tzimtzum. And their difference, very important difference, is that once they come out after the tzimtzum, they are called a shoresh and makar la'olamos. The lights are now already a source for the worlds. These very same lights, when they're before tzimtzum, are not called a source for the world. He calls them sharshei ha'oros earlier, but they're not a makar la'olamos. It's not yet a source for the worlds. What we're going to learn right now is they're a siba la'olamos. They're not a source. They're not a root. Shoresh means the root. It's the root of the world. That we can't say they are, and not a makar, not a source, but a siba. A siba means that because it is, that's why worlds can be. But you can't say that this is already the beginning of the beginning of the beginning of the world. You're still completely lost in the realm in the infinity of the Ein Sof. And in the infinity of the Ein Sof, there's no room for anything else but the Ein Sof. So the chapter of creation what we call hishtalshalus, the beginning of the progression towards the worlds, has not. We can't call this as part of Seder hishtalshalus, part of the order of progression of worlds. It's complete. Not even the order of the progression of the lights for the world. It's still utterly above any relationship with the worlds, and that's what he's going to explain now. Based on these two levels, Nemar, it says, we say that what it says over here. What is it? Where does it say? This is in the blessings of the Shema that we say every day. So in the first blessing of the morning prayers, we say Hamelach Hamerumam, the king who is exalted, Levadai alone. Mayaz from way back then. Talking about God, we're saying the king, so we're referring to already as God with a certain definition. We're calling him a king, but we're emphasizing that this king is in a state of alone. He is exalted, but alone, which is a strange thing because every exaltation, every time you have somebody who is exalted, an exaltation always has to mean in relative terms. He's exalted from, he's above, he's elevated from something else. Okay, an elevated room. You have a stage, part of the room where it's elevated. So what's that? That's a stage, and that's compared to the rest of the room. That's an elevated state. Or a mountain is elevated earth compared to what? Compared to the other surrounding areas. So elevation always requires, and a king is an elevated being from who? From the rest of the people. Someone who has a high position is elevated. A person who's a great scientist, he's elevated from the rest of the people in terms of his intelligence and his mind, so on and so forth. So every elevation, to be elevated, means to be elevated in reference to something else. Over here we say, Hamelach Hamerumam, a king who is exalted, which means he's elevated, Levadai, alone. That means he's not elevated in comparison to anything else. But then we say, Hamisnase, who Ameruma means exalted, Hamisnase means he's elevated, Miyamois Oilam, from the days of the world. That's the continuation of the sentence. Now over here, we're already speaking, now it makes sense. He's elevated from the days of the world, which means whatever the days of the world are, he's way above that. Compared to that, he's much higher. But the question is, so what's in the beginning? It seems to be in the statement. It's saying that there is a king who's exalted alone. No one in his league doesn't only mean that no one is in his league, but you're elevating him, even if no one else, even non-comparing to anything else, he's elevated. So from what? So he's saying these are these two levels. The Or Ein Sof, as it appears after the Tzimtzum, because it's already considered a source for the Oros of Atzilus, talking about the Kav, the light of the Kav. Once the Oros come out, the Or Ein Sof come out, the second level that we spoke earlier, the level of Chakim V'loi B'chachma Yediyah, the level of, right, the Oros when they're already coming out, Esa Sphira is Belima, that he referred to it before, the 10 Sphirot already, but when they're still substanceless, because they're so elevated, they're still infinite and so on. Yet, it's a source for the world, and therefore on that level, he is exalted, but his exaltedness is in relationship to the world, to the days of the world, which we're soon going to see means the Sphirot of Atzilus are called the days of the world, because they're the power of the worlds. So the Sphirot, these energies, he's exalted way above them, but he's already in relationship to them. However, Hamelach Hameroimam is referring to a more primordial state of the light, where the light is in there's Esa Sphira, so therefore we're calling him already king. King already means there is already somewhat of a beginning of a king has to be a king with something, but yet he's a king alone. It's as if a kingship, it's a king without a people. Usually we say the rule, Ein Melech B'lo Yam. Here there is a king without a people, because it's not possible to be a people yet. Why? Because the light is still in the level of Or Ein Sof, which doesn't leave, till there will not be a tzimtzum, there's not a possibility for anything else to exist. But yet, there is a will that something should exist, and in that will that there is that something should exist, so there's no elevation from anything, because nothing is even possible yet to exist, yet because there is a desire there for something to exist, that already establishes kingship. And remember, the entire realm of the Esa Sfiras Agnuzais is called the Malchut of the Ein Sof, but it's not a Malchut which is a king over anything. It's just a self-defined kingship, and not dependent on anybody outside of it. So its elevation is in himself, from within himself, not related to anything else. But the next level, once the infinity is the tzimtzum is there, God creates, so to speak, a space already for something hypothetically to exist. Then God's reintroduction into that space, now we can say he is going to be the king over everybody, over all the worlds, and that's the meaning of Amisnase. He's exalted miyamois olam from the days of the world. This is what he's explaining over here, how there's a tremendous difference between the esesviros hagnuzos, which are chad, as we spoke earlier. Earlier we differentiated between their level of oneness. This is chad in essence. This is an essential oneness. And here there is a oneness, but the oneness is superimposed by the source. That's what we discussed yesterday. Now we're going to differentiate between these two levels, but not in terms of measuring the oneness versus the pluralism of it, but rather in measuring whether it has a relationship to anything else or whether it's utterly exclusive without any connection to anything else, as he says. So again, one who is elevated from the days of the world. When we say the king that is exalted, is that he is exalted and elevated in essence. No relationship at all to the world. And this is the meaning of, that's why we emphasize over here, alone. He's the only one. Like it says, brings a verse of Isaiah, chapter 2, Perek30A, verse number 11. It says over there, V'nizgav Hashem levado, a very popular verse. V'nizgav Hashem levado, that God will be exalted alone. That's talking about when Mashiach will come. God will be, till then there will be some power and some recognition to humans, this, that. But afterwards, God will stand alone in his exaltedness. But he's bringing the idea, but there it also speaks about Hashem being alone. So it's this representing a level where there's only him. And then there's another verse he brings. Atu Hashem levadecha. God, you are alone. So the true meaning of this idea is in the realm of the pre-tzimtzum, when the Or Ein Sof, where it's not possible for anything else to exist. When he says, and what does this mean? The Ein Sof, the Malchus of the Ein Sof, before the tzimtzum, like as it is before the tzimtzum. There is the Malchus of the Ein Sof that extends past the tzimtzum. What is that? That's the Kav. The Kav is the Malchut of the Ein Sof that is already burrowed through the tzimtzum. So it entered into a whole new realm where there's a possibility for worlds to exist. But before that, it wasn't even a possibility. And again, the Malchus of Ein Sof is not only referring to Malchus, it's referring to the entire level of Esesphiros. It's called the Malchus of the Ein Sof. So the Malchus of the Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum defies the rule of Ein Melech below Am. There is no king without a people. Over here, there is a king without without. It's almost like someone born to be a king, and they are a royal. They are royal, even if it never pans out that any country will ever have them. It's like the Rebbe was born a king, even if it hypothetically he would not have ever. There's certain people that they are essentially exalted. They are, but even then, by humans, it means they're essentially elevated. Means that they're elevated from everybody else. But what we're saying over here, it's not because anybody's elevating them. It's because they have this essential quality. By God, it's infinitely deeper, and that is that He is elevated without even not even in a comparison to someone. It just is elevated. That is before the tzimtzum. This is the estimation that's in the Or Ein Sof. That is infinite. What's the hashara? What's the estimation? His estimation is laheyer b'pchinas gavul. The very notion that he desires to illuminate in a level of gavul, in a level of limitation. So that's why it's called malchus, because the very notion that he is thinking of to reveal himself in a limited manner, that itself puts him in the category of kingship. And that's what we said earlier. That's the 10 spheros, genuzos, that are hidden. Like we said earlier, chapter 27. Because in this level, is in a state of absolute oneness, which means the 10, as we discussed earlier, are in a state of absolute oneness. This level of the 10 spheres are totally one with the Orein Sof, and in the Orein Sof, it's Levado. There's no one other but him. There isn't yet the number, the count of 10 spheres. Perek30A, like we said earlier, chapter 29. And therefore, and that's why this is a completist nasos, which means it doesn't have any relationship with anything that's going to be after the tzimtzum. And therefore, we can't call it a makar to the worlds. We can't call it a rosh for the worlds. Rosh means the beginning. We can't call it a makar, a source. At the best, we can call it a siba. A siba means that because it is, that's why there could be worlds later. Meaning, if not for this, if the Orein Sof would not have had the Hashara, definitely there wouldn't be any worlds. But that doesn't mean that we're already in a state that there is going to be worlds. It's just that without this step, for sure there wouldn't be worlds. This is an essential rising, an elevation. Since he's not yet a makar, a source. And why? Because you're still Ein Sof. There's not even a possibility for anything to exist. So when there is elevation, it's an essential hisnasus, which means it's not in hisnasus an elevation vis a verse something else. It's just elevated. I give up. It's elevated, just elevated, essentially elevated. What are we saying over here? That there isn't anything world. When we're talking about, you're already estimating. You're saying there is an estimation to illuminate the Midah Gevul in a limited fashion. And as we said before, he wants an audience. He's thinking of shining to someone. So there is someone there that he's considering. There is a world that he's considering. Whatever that world will be, he's considering already a recipient. That's what made it different than the expression of the Orein Sof on the higher level, which he's not considering any audience. Therefore, he can just express himself without considering anybody. He can just, like a speaker who doesn't have to consider anybody, can speak forever. But when you realize that there's a crowd there and you can't, you have a 20-minute slot to talk. Oh, you got to hone in to the crowd. So when God is being himself and just limitless completely, there you go. It's without an end. Oh, but what did we say? Why suddenly SS spheres? Why 10? It could be infinite possible. Why 10? Because he's thinking already about to shine to someone. Oh, but then there's someone there already. So what do you mean that there's no one there? Meaning, there's no one there, but there's at least a thought about someone. And from that someone, he's misnase. He's the king over it. So why are we saying that in this level there is nobody? Even though this is a hashar, it's an estimation. The hashara that he's thinking about the world is completely from the perch of the infinite. In other words, he hasn't stepped down even one bit out of the infinite to draw closer to the finite. It's as we discussed this quite a bit earlier, that the infinite is being infinite and being completely remaining in the world of infinite, hasn't even made one iota of a move to step out of his infinite. And from there, he's dreaming about a finite, about an illumination to the finite. And therefore, this entire dream is an infinite dream. And therefore, even the lights that are in this dream are still utterly infinite and utterly in a space where there's infinite, there's no worlds. So yes, yes, there are worlds, but there are no worlds. We've got to get used to these contradictions. He hasn't stepped out. He hasn't begun the process of leaving his comfort zone where he is and there's not but him. Although he's entertaining a desire for worlds. If he made already the first move, if he already began that journey away from himself, even step number 1, that's already a makar, because that's already the beginning of the process. This is before the beginning of the process. More specifically, the klolis hashara azois who hasharas ha'oros. When we say that Hashem is evaluating and estimating over here, he's not evaluating kalim vessels. If he would be evaluating and estimating vessels, kalim worlds in the literal sense, the vessels, which where the vessels are where the real limitations happen, then the very fact that he's entertaining these vessels and thinking about them, that means that there is real gavul already in his head, and therefore this is already considered a makar. This is already the beginning of them. But he's not thinking about worlds. What he's thinking about is how he will shine to the worlds, not worlds. And therefore he says, it's hasharas ha'oros. He's estimating his light. He's estimating how cool it is that I can shine infinitely and I can shine finitely. He's not thinking about who he's shining to. He's thinking about the fact that I could be hypothetically a limited king, and I can be an infinite king. I can be an infinite being, and I can emanate finitely. So he's still only thinking of himself, which means only of his power, not of the actual audience. That hashara. Now there is a much later level where God sketches everything, gets a hashara, gets a sketch of all the actual kalim. You know when that happens? That happens after the tzimtzum. That's what happens in Adam Kadmon. Adam Kadmon is primordial man. That's the first sketch of the actual worlds. Then he's actually thinking of the worlds. Now he's not thinking of the worlds. He's thinking of himself in the relationship of the worlds. For instance, I'll give an example, and this I took from the Sefer Shiurim, Behamshech Maamorim, Perek30A Beis. I referenced that book already earlier. He uses the example as a person can imagine building a home, and then you're imagining what the house will look like, or you can imagine the pleasures you will have in your home, or you can imagine how having a home and you're going to be how you're going to feel in that home, or how you're going to operate in that home, or how the house will bring out. So it's about you, not about the home. It's two different things. When you're thinking about the house, you're actually thinking about the house. You're not thinking about the house. You're thinking about fitting yourself into a house. It's about you, not about the house. And that's a difference of Amshachas ha'oros. Since this is only an estimation of lights, which is still about God, so there is no olam here yet. There is no world yet here. So this hisnasus is still within the realm of him himself, without being anywhere out. Not the vessels. You can't say on this that he's being misnasa from something that's coming into being, because nothing is even being thought of yet to come into being. He's exalting himself in himself, from within himself, in regards to himself, but no one else. And this that it says that he elevates himself from the days of the world, that's already after the tzimtzum, where a possibility of worlds come into existence. Now the oiros, now he's positioning himself into that space where he can share, into the shared space, a space where he's going to share with the creation. Then he is elevated above the world. That's the difference. Before tzimtzum, there's no shared space. It's only him. And even when the little of an acclamation to a world that's taking place is not an acclamation to worlds, it's still a dent within him, how he is going to be in the worlds, but about him, not about worlds. And here is where you're actually sharing the space with the worlds. But he is number one. The rest of the world will be number 2, 3, whatever. But he's number one, and that's the misnaseh miyamoisaylam. That's already in the next level of the light. When it comes in a state of revelation, to become enclosed in the vessels. It's not yet enclosed in the vessels. When it's enclosed in the vessels, it becomes part of the world. But over here, it's misnaseh. It's way above, because it doesn't really have any definitions. The worlds have definitions. And the oiros that go into kalim, the lights that go, have definitions. This light is still utterly definitionless. I don't know, I can't say that. But before it becomes enclosed, in this level, he's no more exalted alone. With an essential exaltedness, just like he's not an essential oneness anymore. He's also not in an essential exaltedness, because he's already revealing himself, to become an actual source for the lights of the Esespheres. So he's no more completely alone. This is already a level that will produce worlds. It's the first stage of the lights that will eventually become the lights of Atzilus and so forth. He's still elevated. Because these lights are also still without substance, in a state of simplicity. They're still elevated from the days of the world, which those days are a real concrete already experiences of definition. Shem Yoimen de Zah, these are the names already of the Zer Ampe, means the 6 emotional element, sphirot of Atzilus, the Yoimen de Esa Spheres de Atzilus Bechlal, and the days of the Esa Spheres of the 10 spheres of Atzilus, which are real sphirot, and where there is already some kind of a real definition and defining elements, and therefore he is still utterly above them. We'll still try to crystallize this Be'ezras Hashem Chulu, Be'ezras Hashem tomorrow in tomorrow's next class.